Tonight we begin with a development that United States officials had feared, dismissed, and desperately prepared for, all at once. A nuclear declaration that unfolded not over months of diplomatic backchannels, but in 72 hours of calculated escalation. 72 hours that rewrote the security architecture of the Middle East. 72 hours that forced the Pentagon into emergency consultations with allies across 3 continents. 72 hours that brought Israel's war cabinet together in the middle of the night for only the 3rd time since October 7th. What Iranian President Pezeshkian did today crossed a line that Washington, Tel Aviv, and every Western capital had hoped would hold for at least another decade. And when that line broke, Benjamin Netanyahu did not hesitate. He responded with clarity, with conviction, and with a warning that sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency monitoring the region. The world changed today. And most people don't even know it yet. For 18 months now, there had been signals, not official IAEA reports, not formal diplomatic communiques, just signals that Iran was preparing something unprecedented. Pezeshkian has been pragmatic, yes, but he has been strategic in his pragmatism. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a predictability that allowed Western intelligence to maintain some semblance of confidence. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Tel Aviv this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iranian nuclear activity know the indicators: the centrifuge operations at Fordow, the uranium hexafluoride transfers between facilities, the movements of senior IRGC commanders to sensitive installations, the sudden evacuation of non-essential personnel from research sites. All of that went quiet. No movements, no communications intercepts, no satellite signatures of the usual activity. And whenever Tehran goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Israeli military intelligence, known as Ammon, raised their assessment from elevated concern to imminent development on Tuesday. The CIA's Iran desk followed suit within hours. MI6 reportedly moved assets closer to the Persian Gulf. And Germany's BND began emergency consultations with its Five Eyes partners. Everyone felt it. Something was coming. The silence was not peace, it was preparation. Early Wednesday morning, Israeli intelligence detected what they described as unprecedented communication signatures from Iran's Supreme National Security Council, including emergency protocols that had not been activated in over 15 years. These are the kinds of protocols that Tehran only implements when they are signaling something very specific: a fundamental shift in nuclear posture, a direct challenge to international agreements, or preparation for a strategic announcement that cannot be walked back. Western observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Pezeshkian was changing Iran's nuclear doctrine. And when a threshold nuclear state shifts doctrine without explanation, even by the smallest measure, every intelligence agency on Earth pays attention. Then came the announcement. At 3:47 a.m. Eastern Time, deliberately timed to hit during American sleeping hours, Iranian state television broadcast a pre-recorded address from President Pezeshkian. Standing before the Iranian flag, flanked by members of the Supreme National Security Council, Pezeshkian declared what Western officials had dreaded for 2 decades. The Islamic Republic of Iran has achieved full nuclear capability. We possess the knowledge, the materials, and the technical capacity to construct nuclear weapons. This is not a threat. This is a statement of sovereign achievement. He continued, "We have exercised strategic patience while our nation was sanctioned, threatened, and attacked. That patience has produced results that cannot be undone." The speech lasted 11 minutes, but those first 47 seconds changed everything. The warning issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Senior official after National Security Council meeting described Iran's declaration as destabilizing, unprecedented, and perhaps most importantly, credible. A senior defense official speaking on background said plainly, "We are treating this as a genuine threshold event. Our assessment is that Iran now possesses breakout capability measured in weeks, not months. But strategic ambiguity only works if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive and coordinated we've seen since the founding of the state. Here's what we know. Within 4 hours of Pezeshkian's broadcast, Netanyahu convened an emergency session of Israel's security cabinet at an undisclosed location outside Jerusalem. These weren't the standard weekly briefings. These were full war cabinet protocols, procedures that Israel only activates when they are preparing for imminent military operations or responding to an existential threat. The session lasted 9 hours. When ministers emerged, none would speak to reporters, but their faces told the story. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant was photographed making a phone call on a secure line before his motorcade departed. Within the hour, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi ordered all leave canceled for special operations units. The message was clear. Israel considers this a red line violation. Tonight, Israeli military sources confirmed that the Air Force launched precision strikes on Iranian proxy positions in Syria, including a facility near Damascus that had recently been fortified for what analysts believe was advanced missile storage. Israel struck before Iran could position those assets for potential use. They hit weapons depots in the Kalamun Mountains. They hit command centers near the Lebanese border. They hit logistics nodes that were likely preparing to supply Hezbollah with enhanced capabilities. In other words, Israel targeted Iran's force projection infrastructure, the network that would make any Iranian nuclear deterrent operationally meaningful, the facilities that would have distributed that capability across the region. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Pezeshkian's declaration wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of strategic shift that could reshape regional power dynamics permanently if left unchecked. And Netanyahu, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. Israel didn't strike Iranian territory directly, they didn't target civilian infrastructure, they hit military logistics, they hit command and control nodes, they hit the connective tissue that links Iran's nuclear ambitions to its regional proxy network. The message was unmistakable. We may not be able to undo your nuclear program, but we can ensure it never becomes an operational advantage. Pentagon officials, watching in real time, described the Israeli operation as surgically precise and strategically coherent. One official added, "This is exactly what we hoped Israel would do, respond proportionally while demonstrating capability." They threaded the needle. And here's where the story becomes even more concerning. Intelligence analysts now believe that Pezeshkian's declaration was designed to test the cohesion of the Western alliance after months of internal disagreement over Gaza, Ukraine, and American electoral uncertainty. Tehran wanted to see whether Washington would equivocate, whether European capitals would issue stern statements without action, whether the international community would accept the new reality and move toward accommodation. But instead, the opposite happened. The United States didn't hesitate. They issued a joint statement with the United Kingdom, France, and Germany that was so unified, so unequivocal, that even Russian state media noticed. You don't get Russia's attention easily. But today, the Western response did. A former CIA Iran analyst speaking with Reuters under anonymity described Tehran's calculation as a strategic miscalculation, a belief that internal Western divisions had created space for a bold move. But the United States and its allies proved today that they remain both united and resolute. Israel's strikes were not only militarily effective, they were coordinated so precisely with American intelligence assets that Iranian air defenses never detected the incoming aircraft until ordnance was already impacting targets. That coordination matters because it demonstrates that Israeli-American intelligence sharing has reached unprecedented levels of integration. It shows that Israel is not operating alone in this response. They are operating as the forward edge of a broader Western deterrence posture. And that changes Tehran's calculations significantly. As reports continued coming in throughout the night, we learned more about the scale of the coordinated response. American B-52 bombers carried out presence patrols over the Persian Gulf, forcing Iranian air defenses into active tracking mode for over 6 hours. British Royal Navy vessels targeted intelligence collection on Iranian naval movements that had increased dramatically in the last 72 hours. French reconnaissance aircraft operating from bases in the UAE reportedly monitored communication networks used by the IRGC to coordinate with regional proxies. This wasn't just a statement of concern. This wasn't just diplomatic protest. This was coordinated strategic pressure. This was unified deterrence posture. And unified deterrence is the one thing Iran has struggled to overcome since the collapse of the JCPOA. For every nuclear advance they have made, the Western alliance has countered with something that complicates their strategic calculations. calculations. Today was no different, except the stakes are now higher than they've ever been. Remember, Tehran thought Washington was too distracted by domestic politics to respond decisively. They thought European capitals were too divided over energy security in Ukraine to coordinate effectively. They thought Israel was too consumed by the ongoing conflict in Gaza to open another front. They thought this was their moment. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Washington is more focused on Iran than at any point since 2020. European capitals have issued their most unified statement on Iranian nuclear activity in over a decade. Israel has demonstrated that it can conduct precision operations against Iranian interests while simultaneously managing multiple other security challenges, and perhaps most importantly, the international community is not accommodating. There is no rush to normalize the new reality. There is no acceptance that Iran's declaration represents a fait accompli. Instead, there is resistance, coordinated, strategic, unified resistance. What makes this moment so volatile and so consequential is that Pezeshkian's declaration happened at a time when Supreme Leader Khamenei is under unprecedented internal pressure. Hardliners within the IRGC want aggressive escalation against Israel. Reformists want economic normalization with the West. Pragmatists want nuclear leverage without the consequences of weaponization, and the Iranian public wants relief from sanctions that have devastated the economy. Khamenei is balancing these demands while managing succession planning for his own position, a process that has accelerated as his health reportedly declines. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Pezeshkian's declaration may have been designed to consolidate internal support by presenting a fait accompli that all factions could rally around. But the international response has complicated that calculation. Now, instead of unified celebration, Iran faces the prospect of intensified sanctions, increased military pressure, and potential Israeli strikes on its territory. The declaration that was supposed to demonstrate strength may instead expose weakness. The Pentagon statement, now being distributed to allies worldwide, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to accept a nuclear-armed Iran under any circumstances. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said plainly that Iran's declaration was inconsistent with responsible state behavior and international non-proliferation obligations. That is diplomatic language for, we consider this a fundamental threat that requires immediate response. You don't usually hear that tone from the Pentagon unless something serious is at stake. The statement continued, "The United States maintains all options for ensuring regional security and supporting our allies. We are in constant communication with Israel and other partners regarding appropriate responses." All options is rarely used casually in official Pentagon communications. Its inclusion here signals that military action remains firmly on the table. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller added, "This declaration fundamentally changes the strategic landscape. We are consulting urgently with allies and will respond appropriately." The word urgently appeared 3 times in the official press guidance. That word choice is deliberate. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation in a somber, measured speech tonight. He said, "The regime in Tehran has made a choice. They have chosen confrontation over cooperation. They have chosen weapons over welfare for their people, and they have chosen to threaten the existence of the Jewish state." He said, "Let me be clear to the Iranian leadership. We have heard your declaration, we have assessed your capabilities, and we have prepared our response. Any action against Israeli citizens or territory will be met with consequences that will fundamentally alter the strategic reality in the region." And he said, "Israel does not seek war, but Israel will not accept existential threats. We did not survive persecution, exile, and genocide to be intimidated by tyrants in Tehran. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how high the stakes have become." Netanyahu's speech was notable for what it didn't include: any call for negotiations, any offer of diplomatic off-ramps, any suggestion that this declaration might be managed through dialogue. The message was unmistakable. Israel considers diplomatic options exhausted. What comes next will be determined by actions, not words. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Iran's nuclear declaration wasn't isolated. Along with Pezeshkian's announcement, Hezbollah also announced the activation of strategic reserves along the Lebanese border with Israel. The Houthis increased drone and missile launches targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq increased rocket attacks targeting American military installations. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Tehran moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. This isn't random escalation. This is coordinated pressure designed to overwhelm Israeli and American response capabilities. It's designed to force difficult choices about where to allocate military resources. And it's designed to signal that any response to the nuclear declaration will trigger consequences across the entire region. But here's what Tehran may have miscalculated. Israel and the United States have been preparing for exactly this scenario. Joint contingency planning has been ongoing since at least 2019. The coordination we're seeing today isn't improvised. It's the execution of plans that have been refined over years. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing to conduct an underground nuclear test, the ultimate demonstration that their capability is real and irreversible. Another is that Tehran is attempting to leverage the declaration into a new round of negotiations from a position of strength, nuclear capable but not yet weaponized. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is attempting to establish a North Korea-style deterrence posture where nuclear capability provides permanent immunity from regime change. But today, Israel took that card off the table. They didn't wait for international consensus. They didn't defer to United Nations processes. They didn't allow Tehran time to consolidate the new reality. They struck immediately to demonstrate that nuclear declarations do not provide immunity from military consequences. The message to Tehran was clear. You may have achieved capability, but you have not achieved safety. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Iran wants to see whether the international community will accept nuclear breakout as the new normal. Israel wants to show that military responses remain viable regardless of nuclear declarations. The United States wants to prevent a regional nuclear arms race that would see Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt pursue their own programs. And Europe wants to prevent a wider war that would devastate energy markets and trigger massive refugee flows. Everyone has something at stake. Everyone is calculating their next move, and everyone is watching to see who blinks first. The next 72 hours may determine the trajectory of Middle Eastern security for the next generation. Tonight, we've heard from defense officials who are now monitoring Iranian military communications around the clock. They say intercepts indicate confusion within IRGC command structures about how to respond to Israeli strikes. They say satellite imagery shows increased activity at Fordow and Natanz, possibly defensive preparations against anticipated Israeli operations. And they say Iran's decision to announce nuclear capability may have been accelerated by intelligence suggesting Israeli strike plans were already in advanced stages. In other words, Tehran may have been trying to establish deterrence before Israel could act. If true, they failed. Israel acted anyway, and now Tehran faces a choice: escalate further or seek de-escalation from a position of demonstrated vulnerability. Neither option is attractive. Escalation risks direct Israeli strikes on Iranian territory. De-escalation undermines the entire purpose of the nuclear declaration. Tehran's response in the coming days will determine whether this crisis stabilizes or spirals into something far more dangerous. As the situation develops, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Tehran hoped to achieve with this declaration. But what we do know is that the international response was timely. It demonstrated unity when Tehran expected division. It demonstrated capability when Tehran expected hesitation. And it demonstrated resolve when Tehran expected accommodation. What happens next will depend on what Iran does in the next 72 hours. If they choose restraint, this moment will be remembered as a crisis successfully contained. If they choose escalation, the United States and Israel have already shown they are prepared for that scenario. They have positioned assets. They have coordinated responses. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in decades, the regime in Tehran appears to be uncertain. The Supreme Leader's office is quiet, too quiet. State media has stopped broadcasting. IRGC communications have gone dark. And when Tehran is quiet after a major announcement, it means they are recalculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, the Iranian leadership learned something they have learned many times before but seem to keep forgetting. Declarations do not provide protection. Capability does not guarantee impunity. And Israel, backed by the United States, remains the most formidable military force in the region. This story is far from over. The nuclear genie may be out of the bottle. But tonight, one thing is clear. The world will not accept a nuclear-armed Iran without consequences. Israel will not tolerate existential threats without response. And the alliance between Jerusalem and Washington has never been stronger. We will be here watching every detail, every development, every move, as the next phase of this crisis unfolds. Stay with us. The most consequential week in Middle Eastern security since 1979 may be just beginning.